Hello, and welcome to part 6 of my GameMaker Basics tutorial series. In this video, I'm going to cover some of the different draw functions. The draw functions allow you to draw text or sprites directly to the screen. You can draw other things too, like surfaces, but we're not going to cover those for now. We're only going to cover drawing text and sprites to the screen. So why would you want to do that? Why would you want to draw either of those things directly to the screen? Well, because sometimes you just want to show text and you don't necessarily need an object. Same thing with a sprite. Obviously, when you have a character and you want to move, then yeah, it makes sense to make an object for something that needs to move and you needs to be interacted with. But if you just need to show a thing like a health bar or a score counter or something on screen, and you don't really need to ever physically interact with it in the room, then you can totally just draw it. So a good way to cover a lot of the draw functions is to make a title screen. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. We're going to make a basic title screen for our game, right? Because right now when we run our game, we go straight into, this room with the grass. However, that's not normally how games work, right? First, when you start up the game, you go to like a title screen where it shows you like the name of the game and an option screen, and then you have to, press something to actually go into the game. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make a title screen that shows the title of our game, and we're gonna actually add functionality to move from that title screen into the game. So the first thing we're gonna do is actually create another room, and I'm gonna do that by duplicating our current room. That way we can be sure that they're going to be the same size, and that's kind of important to have rooms that are the same size. That way the window doesn't change size while you're playing. Of course, we don't need all these objects in our title screen, so a quick way to delete them all is to go here to this instant layer window, and you can basically select them all by selecting the top item, scrolling all the way down, hold shift, click, and that selects everything, and then just hit the delete key and that'll delete every single object. Also, we should rename this room to rm_game start, and we're gonna grab it and drag it over this room so that it's the first room. That way when the game starts, it'll start in the game start room and not the grass field. So it's an empty room right now, and that's good. We're gonna go ahead and create a new object, and we're gonna call it obj game start, kind of like the room. Easy. We don't need to assign a sprite to this because it's just gonna be an object that runs some code for us, and that code is gonna be our title screen. We could have called this object title screen, but it's gonna do a little bit more than just the title screen, so I figured game start is a good enough name. So we're gonna go ahead and create a create trigger or event for this object so that we can initialize some variables. And the first one is going to be a variable called a game name. Now, of course, a name that we're going to display has to be a string. Variables can be numbers or strings, and so this is going to be definitely a string. And of course, our game name is actually Crazy Carl Quest. All string variables have to be enclosed inside double quotation marks, just like this, or else they won't work. And you know what? That's it. That's all we're going to do for here, because I want to keep things simple for now. So now that we have this variable that contains a string, how do we draw that? How do we draw that onto the screen? Very easy. Go back into our game start so that we can see this add event button. We're going to click the add event, and this time we're going to go into draw. And we're just going to pick that top one. There's actually lots of options down here, but we can ignore them for now. We're just going to go into draw and draw, the basic generic draw command. And here, we're literally just going to use a command that's draw_text. This function wants 3 parameters, basically an X, a Y, and what you want to actually draw and display. So we're just going to do 0, 0, and then of course a game name so that it shows our game name. Now, of course, it won't actually do anything. This object won't do anything if we don't put it in the room. So we're going to go ahead and drag in this game start object to the room. I like putting these types of objects in the top left corner. So let's go ahead and run the game and see what happens. Cool. All right. For starters, we have our window and it shows that string name that we defined. However, there's a couple things here. Number one, why is the window small again? Didn't we already solve that problem? We did. However, we solved it by creating an object view, and that object view we did not move into the game start room. So let's go ahead and do that now. That way now we will have the ability to increase the window size. Okay, what else is wrong with here? Well, title screens should be at least a little bit more flashier, right? So we kind of want our game name to, number one, be centered, be bigger, and maybe not white, a generic color. So let's go ahead and go back into our game start object. GameMaker is actually kind of nice in the sense that we really didn't define anything about our text, our font, or anything, and yet it still drew something. It actually just used a default font, it used a default size and a default color, which happened to just work for us. Had we had a white background, we wouldn't have seen anything because the default color is white. So we kind of lucked out there, but in reality, we want to define everything about our text. So we're gonna go ahead and make a couple functions. We're gonna go ahead and make a function or a variable called title color, which of course is going to be the color of our title screen text, and we're gonna go ahead and make that, let's say, blue. One thing I didn't mention before is if you do C underscore, GameMaker is going to list all the colors that are baked into the program, right? Black, white, blue, gray, green, lime, a bunch of colors that are ready to go, ready for you to use. However, just because you don't see a color in here that you want, like pink or brown, doesn't mean that they don't exist. You can totally make those colors. We're not gonna go over that right now, but just know that you can make literally any color you want. You just have to define it yourself. The colors you see here are basically just nice little default baked in colors that you can use right away. So we're gonna go with sea blue. And then we're gonna go ahead and make another variable called center X. This is gonna be a coordinate that's in the middle of the room so that we can draw our text there. So what is the middle of the room? Well, if you think about it, it's actually pretty simple. There's a variable, a built-in variable called room width, and that's going to return the width of the room in pixels, of the current room in pixels. So that's really useful. Of course, we don't want the entire width. We want half of it, so we can literally just do divide by 2. The backslash equals divide by, basically, in programming. And we want to center it X and Y. So we're going to do another variable called center Y, but instead of getting the width, we obviously want to get the room height and also divide it by 2. Cool. And then lastly, we want to define a title font, right? Because we want the font to be bigger and maybe we want it to be, more stylized. Well, in this case, we actually need to create a font asset. In GameMaker, fonts are assets just like sprites and objects. So we're going to go ahead and right click fonts and do create font. We're going to name it font underscore 40. I like to do this basically. You don't have to do this, but I like to name my fonts the size that they are. See where it says size here? I'm going to type in 40 because I want this font to be of size 40. And I just like to name my fonts like that. You can name it whatever you want, but I like calling them the size that they are. And over here, you can actually type in whatever you want so that you can get a little preview of kind of what it's going to look. Crazy Call Quest. And of course, right here where it says select font, you can select from all the fonts that are installed on your system. So we're just going to go with Calibri for now. A nice little simple font. Here you can define if you want it to be bold or regular. So let's go ahead and go just bold for now, since we know it's going to be for the title screen. And then here you can define if you want anti-aliasing on it. It'll smooth out the fonts a little so they're not as blurry or pixelated. But our game is a pixel art game, so I'm going to leave it off. But it's really just you know, dealer's choice. You can choose to have it on or off, whatever looks nicer to you. I'm gonna go with off anti-aliasing. 40 size, bold, font 40. We're good. At the same time though, I'm gonna go ahead and right click, duplicate it. And I'm gonna make another font though called font 20, which is gonna be the exact same font style. It's just gonna be 20 font size instead of 40. And you'll see why, because we're gonna want to draw multiple things on the screen, and we don't all want them all to be of the same size. So now that we've defined our fonts, we can go back into our object game start and finish giving this variable a value. So our title, we're gonna want to use the big font of font 40. Cool. Now, however, that's not enough. We've defined these variables, but the game isn't using them. In fact, we can tell that the game isn't using them because we have a little exclamation point right here on the side, and it says that variable title color only referenced once. So that basically means that you've initialized it, you've given it a value. However, you're not using it, you're not reading it anywhere. So that's what this little symbol means, and it's kind of nice and handy, right? We don't have that symbol on this function because we are in fact using it right here in the draw event. So that's nice, a nice little way to know if you're not utilizing a variable. Of course, we are going to use those variables. We're going to use them right here. This draw text function, like I said, is using the default color for starters. So if you actually want to change the color of the text, you need to call a function called draw set color. That's simple. And you just have to pass it the variable, the color that you want. And our color is, of course, title color. So that's going to change the color. However, as for the font, you do draw set font. Cool. And we set it to the font variable that we defined earlier. Awesome. And then, of course, instead of drawing it at 0, 0, of course, 0, 0 being the top left corner, we want to draw it in the center, and we already defined those variables. So let's go ahead and type them in here, center X and center Y. Sweet. So now let's run the game. Number one, the window is bigger. Cool. Let's go ahead and make it a little smaller. The window is bigger, so that's good. Our text is blue and our text is big. Cool. So all that worked. However, you may think, well, this is not centered. And well, technically it is. The thing is, it's not centered relative to the center of the string, right? If you look closely, technically the C in crazy is centered. The problem is that all the text is then written forward. So we need to change that, relative point for where the text is centered. And that's actually a really easy fix. All we gotta do is call a function called draw set underscore H align. H, of course, stands for horizontal. And we gotta give it a constant of FA center. Boom. If we actually right click here on FA center, it'll actually give us a little example of what draw set align does. So you can see here that draw set FA left is gonna, of course, align it like this. Left align, center will align your text like that, and right like that. It makes sense when you see it like this. So that's cool how you can just right click on a function and it'll give you a little image explaining what it does. However, we actually want to align it horizontally and vertically. So instead of H, you use V. However, instead of center, you have to do middle. It's a different function, so a different constant. So yeah, FA center and FA middle will center it vertically and horizontally. Perfect. So now if we run our game, boom, now the text is centered relative to the center of the text, and it actually looks pretty darn good. However, there's nothing you can do here. I mean, we can change the size of the window. However, we can't actually start the game. We can't go into our grass room. So let's go ahead and prompt the user, or letting him know that he can actually go in. So let's do a start game comment here. And up here, we should put a comment that says title screen. We're going to redefine, well, make copies of these variables, but name them slightly different. We're gonna do start game, and we're gonna set this string variable to press space to start. There we go. Instead of title color, we're just calling it like game color. And then we're not gonna wanna draw it at the same location as the title. Obviously the text would overlap, so we want to draw it a little bit lower. So instead of dividing by 2, we're going to multiply. If I were to multiply by 0.5, that's the same as dividing by 2. So we're going to do times 75, right? That's going to put it 3/4 of the way down on the screen. So that's a good spot for this text. Of course, instead of center Y, this will be game Y. And then instead of title font, it'll be game font. And we'll go ahead and use that slightly smaller font that we defined earlier. So now that we have that, we can kind of copy this text. Again, we should comment this, letting us know that this is the title. And over here is the game start text. And we're going to go ahead and reset these function values, because if we don't reset them, then obviously if we were just to use this draw text command, it would use the same font and the same color and the same everything. But we don't want that, right? We want to use a different font. We want to use the game font, which is slightly smaller. We want to use the game color, which is going to be white. Actually, we forgot to define that. So let's go back in there. Game font, or no, we did. Game color here. We just forgot to actually set it to white. Here we go. So game color is white. There it is, game color. We still want it to be horizontally aligned center and middle, the same as the title. So we actually don't need to call these functions again because we want them to be the same. Therefore, there's no need to repeat ourselves. The text is still going to be centered. And then, of course, instead of drawing it in the same spot as our title, we're going to do game Y. And instead of writing the title of the game, it's actually what? Start game? Start game. There we go. So now we're going to be drawing something else. Slightly different color, slightly different font, slightly different text. And there it is. Press space to start. Sweet. One more thing. There's one more really strong draw function that is used very commonly, and that is draw hero, which means that we're going to use the draw sprite command. Draw sprite will, of course, let you draw any sprite you want. If I were to do 0, 0 and then specify the, oh, my bad. In the draw sprite command, the order of the arguments is actually a little bit different. First, you specify the sprite, in which case we want the sprite hero. Then you specify which sub-image of this sprite you want to use. Remember, sprites can be composed of multiple sub-images. We actually want 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We want the one where he's facing towards us. So we want 6 as our sub-image. Then you define where you want it. For now, we're going to do 0, 0. And then we're going to run our game. So you can see, I'm drawing the hero on the top left corner. Sweet. Of course, I can't move him or anything because he's not an object. He's literally just the graphic of our hero drawn in the corner. Cool. However, I'm thinking of drawing him next to the press space text. I want one on the left and one on the right. How can we achieve that? How can we figure out the exact location without, guessing, without just putting in numbers over and over to figure it out? Can we do it, mathematically in a smart way? Well, there is actually, because there is a function called string width, like this, and it's basically going to return to you in pixels how wide a certain string is. Now, of course, the string that we're concerned with is start game. That's going to return the entire width of that string. However, we don't want the entire string width of the string. We want like half of it. That way we can move it to the left and move to the right of it. So we're going to go ahead and divide by 2. And we're going to define the variable called, let's say, SPR offset for now. Cool. So we're getting the width of the entire screen. We're dividing it by 2. And how is that helping us? Well, now we're going to be able to draw it at the center X minus, whoops, I forgot to copy this, SPR offset. We're going to want to draw one to the right of that text, and we're going to want to draw it at the game start Y, or just game Y height. And we're going to want to draw it again, but this time to the right of the text, everything else being the same. So let's go to run our game and see how that looks now. Okay, that somewhat works. We have our two heroes, and they're technically, you know, where they're kind of supposed to be, but not really. Couple things wrong. Number one, over here when we're defining the string width, the game we're not telling the game specifically how or what font we're using when we're defining the string width. So it's kind of, I think, using the default font size, right? So what you want to do here is actually call this draw set function. And that's going to basically tell GameMaker, hey, use this font's size to determine the size of our text so that we can get an accurate representation or an accurate number of how wide this text is going to be. So now we're running our games. The heroes should be a little bit more spread apart, and they are. They're a little more spread apart. However, they're not perfect. This is showing us, see how this hero is a little further in, and then this hero is a little like too far out. Well, that's because of our sprite's offset. If we go into our sprite, you can see that our offset here, if I zoom out a little, see this little cross right here? It's hard to tell, but this cross is right on top of this pixel right here, which is the 0, 0, which is the origin, and that's the default location, right? 0, 0 for our origin. That means whenever we draw this sprite, this is the point where it's being drawn relative to. We could do middle center, and that'll move the origin to the center, which would make our lives easier for this, you know, for drawing it exactly where we want. But I don't want to do that because it's going to screw with our hero later on in the game. So we're going to leave the origin at 0, 0 and instead just use a little bit of, you know, hacky math to solve our little offset problem here. So let's go and go back to the game start. Actually, to the draw. Since our offset isn't 0, 0 and our sprite width is 16 by 16, if we were to move this guy by 8 pixels over to the left, that would center him on this side. And if over here we were to subtract 8 from his current location, then he'd be a little further in, and that should technically solve our problem. Boom. See, they're both inside the text, but they are equally inside the text. So if we just slightly increase this width, so instead of multiplying by 0.5, let's go ahead and multiply by 0.6 basically. And that's gonna put our heroes a little further away. Beautiful. That's what I wanted. They're equal distance from the center by using that little offset value that we made. And so that looks a little better. However, they're also a little too low. And again, because we're compensating the X values with this little 8, but we're not compensating the Y. So again, our sprite is 16 by 16. So if we subtract half of it, then that should totally center our sprite exactly where we want it. Beautiful. However, I'm pressing space, nothing's happening. That is the quickest fix ever. Go into our game start. We've already worked with the key press triggers before. We're simply gonna assign this space. Space obviously means space bar in this case. And we're gonna use the simplest, most awesome function ever. We wanna, of course, go to that grass room. So we're gonna use a function called room, go to, and then you specify the room you wanna go to. Easiest function ever. Boom. So now we're gonna run our game. We see our title text. We see our little hero. Press space. Boom. We just moved and started our game in the grass field. How amazing is that? We made a little title screen, and it actually moves us into the game after we press start. So as you can see, these draw functions are pretty powerful. With very little code, we were able to draw lots of things, center them, move them around, modify them, and we didn't have to worry about, you know, any actual objects. We're just drawing them. And so it lets you, well, get really creative in how your game looks by drawing sprites and drawing text anywhere you want on the screen or in the room. So as always, If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.